You don't remember when it started, only that it felt safer to smile, safer to agree, safer to not ask for too much, to show up not as yourself, but as the version of you that made everyone else comfortable. And somewhere along the line, that version became your identity. The nice guy, reliable, pleasant, thoughtful, easy to talk to, easier to forget. At first, you told yourself it was strength, that you were mature enough to rise above the drama, that being needed, liked, or appreciated was enough. But eventually, something broke. You kept losing respect, losing attraction, losing connection, not because you weren't good, but because you had no edge. People started to treat you like background noise. Women appreciated you, but only until they didn't. Friends counted on you, but never listened to you. And deep down, you knew. This wasn't kindness anymore, it was self-erasure. But here's the part that stings. You thought you were being noble. You thought love was earned through goodness. You thought avoiding conflict made you wise. Nietzsche didn't. Nietzsche believed that morality, especially in the form of niceness, wasn't virtue at all. It was a mask, crafted by the weak, worn by the scared, and sold to those desperate to be loved without being seen. And the truth is brutal. You're not nice because you're good. You're nice because you're afraid of being abandoned, afraid of being judged, afraid that if people saw who you really were, they'd walk away. This isn't about being polite. This is about being trapped. Because the longer you perform goodness to earn love, the more invisible you become. And what you call kindness, Nietzsche called a kind of slavery. So if you're tired of being overlooked, misunderstood, or quietly resentful, then keep watching. Stay to the end, because Nietzsche doesn't just expose the lie. He shows you how to become someone who never needed it. Before a man learns who he is, he learns who he needs to be to survive. And for many, survival began with being agreeable, not strong, not clear, not grounded, just agreeable. From childhood, boys are shaped by subtle emotional conditioning. They're told to be polite, told to be gentle, told to be good, but rarely told what any of that actually means. Praise is given not for truth, but for obedience, not for authenticity, but for convenience. The boys who caused the least trouble were called mature. The boys who stayed quiet were labeled well-adjusted. The ones who questioned too much, cried too loudly, or resisted too often were seen as threats to the emotional stability of the room. And so they learned quickly that being themselves was risky, that presence must be diluted to keep the peace. What most men call kindness was never a choice. It was a strategy, a mask carved slowly over years of subtle punishment for being too loud, too angry, too intense. Parents, teachers, sometimes even therapists, praised them for suppressing their edge. And over time, this edge was not just hidden, it was amputated. But what no one explained was the trade-off. Being liked is easy. It requires very little, a smile, a nod, some self-restraint, a little emotional labor to soothe whoever's in front of you. It's a social transaction. You give people what they want, and they give you temporary acceptance. But being respected, being felt, requires a different substance entirely. It requires tension, risk, discomfort. It demands that you remain intact, even when your presence challenges someone's expectation. And that's exactly what the nice guy was taught to avoid. He was conditioned to remove friction, to adjust tone, to absorb discomfort so that others wouldn't have to. He made himself emotionally useful, predictable, non-threatening. He learned that withholding his opinions, delaying his needs, or laughing at things he didn't find funny would make him more palatable. And he mistook that palatability for worth. But being digestible is not the same as being desirable. Respect begins where performance ends. It arises when a man is self-contained, when his words carry weight not because they're pleasing, but because they're anchored in something unshakable. The nice guy has no such anchor. He floats between expectations, saying whatever will reduce tension, believing that the avoidance of offense is the height of moral character. It isn't. It's the fear of rejection, spiritualized, and it's been passed down for generations. In many families, niceness was the armor worn by men who were never allowed to feel anger, who were taught to protect others but never themselves, who survived their marriages, their workplaces, their friendships by being useful, not real. This chapter isn't about blaming parents or society. It's about recognizing the shape of your conditioning. Before any man becomes powerful, he must see how he was trained to become weak, not by force, but by reward. Because you weren't punished into submission. You were praised into disappearing. What if your morality wasn't yours? What if the voice in your head that says, be good, be kind, don't upset anyone, was never born from inner wisdom, but from social survival? Nietzsche didn't believe in universal morality. He believed morality had a purpose: to bind the strong, to elevate the weak, and to domesticate the human will. He called it slave morality, not because of chains, but because it turns self-denial into virtue. Slave morality is the belief system created by those who feel powerless. Instead of overcoming their position, they declare it sacred. They say that humility is noble, that obedience is good, that suffering is virtuous. But underneath these declarations is something darker: resentment, the silent rage of those who cannot rise, who cannot act, and who must transform that impotence into moral superiority. And this is exactly what modern niceness often becomes: a moral shield for fear, a spiritualized retreat from conflict, a polished identity crafted not from power but from the terror of losing connection. The nice guy doesn't speak his mind, not because he's patient, but because he's afraid. He doesn't set boundaries, not because he's wise, but because he's terrified of being abandoned. He treats others well, not from overflow, but from a deep, unspoken need to be chosen. But slave morality tells him that this is strength, that to need nothing, demand nothing, and challenge nothing is a higher path, that suppressing anger is spiritual, that disappearing in a relationship is mature, that to forgive everything and tolerate everyone is some kind of enlightenment. It isn't. It's fear in costume. Slave morality teaches you to measure your worth by your usefulness, to seek approval from those you secretly resent, to reduce your needs to zero so no one ever has a reason to leave. And eventually, you begin to resent anyone who doesn't play by the same rules. The man who says what he means, the woman who sets hard boundaries, the friend who demands respect instead of just giving it. You don't admire them. You feel judged by them because they do what you can't. And so, niceness becomes a theology, a way to feel superior while being scared, a way to convince yourself that compromise is noble, that comfort is clarity, and that anyone who wants more than approval is dangerous. But Nietzsche's warning is this: slave morality doesn't lead to peace. It leads to stagnation, to the death of the will, to the erosion of selfhood under the weight of social praise. You're not meant to be liked by everyone. You're meant to live in alignment with your deepest instincts. And when those instincts have been buried under decades of politeness, recovery will feel like betrayal. But it's not betrayal, it's resurrection. There's a quiet bitterness inside every nice guy, but it's buried so deep even he doesn't notice it. He tells himself he's not angry, that he's above all that he doesn't keep score. But the resentment is there. It surfaces when he's overlooked, when he's rejected after doing everything right, when he sees someone else act with confidence, with edge, with demand, and be loved for it. It comes out in subtle ways: passive-aggressive comments, delayed replies, a tightening in the jaw when someone sets a boundary he doesn't feel allowed to set. He calls it self-control, Nietzsche called it resentment, and it's one of the most corrosive psychological forces a man can carry. Resentment is not anger, it's repressed anger moralized. It's the quiet conviction that those with power are corrupt, those who express desire are arrogant, and those who live freely must be brought down or exposed. Not through confrontation, but through judgment, through moral comparison, through whispered superiority. The nice guy doesn't believe he wants power. He claims he wants peace, but what he really wants is to be rewarded for playing small. He wants his silence to be seen as wisdom, his self-denial to be admired as maturity. He wants the world to recognize how good he's been, how much he's tolerated, how many times he's been passed over and still showed up smiling. But when that recognition doesn't come, and it rarely does, resentment begins to grow. He starts to resent the women he can't attract, the friends who don't value his presence, the world that doesn't validate his sacrifices. But instead of expressing that pain honestly, he buries it beneath more niceness, more accommodation, more spiritual language about letting go and being the bigger person, all while secretly hoping that someone finally sees how good he's been and rewards him for it. This is the tragedy. Resentment keeps the nice guy trapped in a cycle. He believes he's too good to leave. He won't speak his truth because that would feel like betrayal. He won't reclaim his power because that would feel selfish. He won't admit his rage because that would mean confronting how long he's abandoned himself. So he just smiles. And underneath the smile, the bitterness deepens. Because it's not that he doesn't feel desire, it's that he's spent so long pretending not to want anything, he's forgotten how to name what he needs. He envies men who live unapologetically but calls them toxic. He desires women who set boundaries but accuses them of being cold. He wants freedom but believes he has to earn it by pleasing everyone first. This is resentment in its purest form, the moral elevation of your own suppression, and the secret hope that someone else will pay the price for your silence. But that payment never comes, because no one can reward you for hiding who you are. Nice guys are often confused by their own rejection. They do everything right. They listen. They remember birthdays. They check in. They support everyone around them with tireless patience. And yet, again and again, they find themselves ignored, dismissed, taken for granted. The women they like say he's amazing, but date someone else. The friends he supports call when they're in crisis, but rarely when he needs anything. And in professional settings, he's seen as dependable, but never a leader. This confusion is not superficial. It cuts deep into a man's identity, because for the nice guy, kindness isn't just a behavior. It's his proof of worth. He's been trained to believe that being agreeable makes him valuable, that accommodating everyone's needs will eventually lead to recognition, that the more he gives, the more he'll be chosen. But he's not chosen. He's overlooked. Why? Because respect doesn't come from accommodation. It comes from presence, from the capacity to say no, from emotional independence, from the willingness to create friction when truth demands it. And this is precisely what the nice guy lacks. The nice guy has no friction. He's emotionally absorbent, taking in others' pain, adjusting his tone, making himself smaller when the energy in the room shifts. He thinks this makes him safe, but to others, it makes him feel hollow, unanchored. He seems kind, but strangely hard to feel. Always there, yet never fully visible. Respect is a response to groundedness. It arises when people sense that you are self-contained, that your values are not up for negotiation, that your presence alters the room, not because you perform, but because you're rooted. The nice guy isn't rooted. He's responsive. His identity is shaped by the people in front of him, and his emotions are filtered through the question, will this make them like me more or less? There's nothing wrong with being kind, but when kindness is rooted in self-abandonment, it becomes a form of manipulation, a transaction, a performance designed to elicit safety, and people can feel it. They may not be able to articulate why, but something doesn't sit right. The nice guy seems trustworthy but not solid, caring but not compelling. And over time, people instinctively test him. They interrupt him. They ignore his suggestions. They cross his boundaries because there never seemed to be any to begin with. He becomes the safe place to unload, but not the person you turn to for leadership. The emotional support, but never the emotional center. And so, the nice guy starts to fracture. He wonders why others succeed with less kindness, why people chase those who are distant, why directness earns more loyalty than sensitivity ever did. It's not because the world is cruel, it's because the world respects truth more than performance. And until a man learns to confront, to assert, to disappoint others without guilt, he will remain respected only for his absence, never for his presence. There's a force in you that never went away. You've buried it beneath politeness. You've masked it with patience. You've silenced it with a smile, but it's still there. Nietzsche called it the will to power, the fundamental drive not just to survive, but to express, to assert, to become. It's the animating force behind every act of growth, risk, defiance, and creation. And while most men think they've evolved beyond it, think they're too gentle, too wise, too healed for something so primal, the truth is that they've only suppressed it. The nice guy tells himself he's different, that he doesn't want control or dominance or power, that all he wants is harmony, connection, mutual respect. But if that were true, he wouldn't feel so empty. Because the will to power isn't about controlling others. It's about reclaiming yourself. It's the instinct that says, I exist, I matter, I will no longer negotiate my worth. The nice guy suppresses that voice, not because he's evolved, but because he's scared of what might happen if he stops pleasing everyone. He believes that to claim power is to become dangerous, that if he speaks his truth, he'll lose love, that if he acts decisively, he'll be punished, that if he disappoints others, he'll be abandoned. So he keeps deferring, he keeps waiting for permission, he keeps hoping that someone else will give him the green light to live as himself. But no one ever will, because no one respects a man who needs to be told he's allowed to exist. And this is where Nietzsche's insight cuts deepest. Every time you censor yourself to be accepted, you surrender to a morality built by fear. Every time you suppress your will, you reinforce the idea that your truth is dangerous. Every time you say yes when you mean no, you carve away another piece of your spine. Eventually, you forget what power even feels like. You mistake passivity for peace. You call your silence maturity. But your body remembers. It remembers the arguments you avoided, the desires you diluted, the rage you swallowed and called understanding. Your nervous system adapts to that suppression and then punishes you for it with anxiety, resentment, and fatigue. And the worst part? No one sees the cost but you. Because to the outside world, you're the good man. But internally, you're crumbling. Not from cruelty, but from disuse. Not from conflict, but from never being willing to cause any. The will to power isn't something you earn, it's something you've always had. But you learn to fear it, to mistrust your own instincts, to spiritualize your own erasure. So now the question is no longer whether you're nice. The question is, what's underneath the niceness? Because if that will doesn't come forward, it will turn on you. And the pain you feel isn't because you're broken. It's because something in you is still alive, and it's done waiting. The goal is not to kill your kindness. You were never wrong for caring. You were never wrong for being gentle, patient, attentive. Those weren't weaknesses. They became weaknesses when they stopped being a choice. That's the difference. Most nice guys don't express kindness from freedom. They express it from fear. Fear of conflict, fear of abandonment, fear of not being seen as valuable. So their kindness becomes performance, a role, a strategy. And because of that, it's exhausting. Not because kindness is hard, but because pretending is. What Nietzsche wanted wasn't cruelty. He wasn't calling for men to become hardened or violent or numb. He was calling for them to wake up, to live with intensity, to stop moralizing their submission and start living with presence. He wanted men to choose when to give, to choose when to say no, to choose who deserves access, to choose kindness, not as a shield, but as a declaration of strength. You're not supposed to be safe for everyone. You're supposed to be true. And when you are, your kindness becomes something else entirely. It becomes clarity, not a tool to win love, but an extension of wholeness. You stop asking how to avoid disappointment. You start asking what your integrity demands. You stop asking how to be liked. You start asking what you're meant to become. Because the nice guy was never meant to be your final form. He was a necessary stage, the part of you that learned how to survive. But you're not here to survive. You're here to stand in something deeper, to offer love without begging for it, to speak truth without checking the temperature of the room, to be seen not because you've made yourself acceptable, but because you've made yourself real. And that means there will be losses. When you stop managing everyone's perception, some people will leave. When you stop saying yes to everything, you'll be called selfish. When you show anger without shame, you'll be misunderstood. Let them go. Because what comes next is not louder, but deeper. You will learn how to be kind without collapsing, how to serve without shrinking, how to love without needing to disappear. And you'll realize the version of you that begged for closeness, that smiled through betrayal, that stayed soft so others didn't feel threatened. He was never bad. He was just scared. But now you're not. Now you've felt the pain of being tolerated, not loved, of being needed but never respected, of being good but never chosen. And now you're done performing. You're done hoping someone will reward your silence. You're done earning a place in rooms you've outgrown. You're done making your goodness a cage. Because when kindness is no longer a tactic, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes power.